Hello and welcome back to story time. So, yeah, the reason that I did it that way is because the last chapter of The Magician's Nephew was deleted due to a copyright strike from using a fireplace, as well as the first and second chapters of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So I've been meaning to re-record them, and I'm finally making it happen. So now we're going to read the first two chapters of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And then next week on Wednesday, we will be continuing with The Horse and His Boy. So yes, it's a little bit confusing. The stories are jumping all over the place, but this will be the only time that it's going to be like this because I'm not going to get any more copyright strikes. So, and if you remember, the wardrobe that Diggory made, that's the wardrobe right here that we're going to enter. So pretty awesome how they tie together like that. Oh, and here's a map of Narnia. I know y'all like the pictures. Kind of cool. But hello and welcome to story time yet again. We're continuing the Chronicles of Narnia. This is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. My books are well loved. Pages are just falling out of them. Hey, Barbara. Another Lord of the Rings map. Yes, indeed. I like books with pictures. Quite nice. Quite nice. All right. Well, hello to Eric and Barbara and Sue Finelli and Kirk Wilson. And I'm sure Zula will be joining us as well. Yep. And Carrie Skates, hello. Yes, these chapters got deleted. I've been meaning to re-record them. I was going to just record them and upload them, but you guys all like being in chat, so I figured why not do them live again. So, oh yes, Carrie, you enjoy my sign. So I thought that was quite funny. That's one of my favorite catchphrases. And so luckily I had enough letters to throw that up there. But again, if you have any requests for my sign, please let me know. I have 2 letters of each letter, so you have to be strategic with what it says, but yeah. So, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Chapter 1, Lucy looks into a wardrobe. Once there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy. This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the heart of the country, 10 miles from the nearest railway station and 2 miles from the nearest post office. He had no wife, and he lived in a very large house with a housekeeper called Mrs. Macready and 3 servants. Their names were Ivy, Margaret, and Betty. But they do not come into the story much. He himself was a very old man with shaggy white hair which grew over most of his face as well as on his head, and they liked him almost at once. But on the first evening when he came out to meet them at the front door, he was so odd-looking that Lucy, who was the youngest, was a little afraid of him, and Edmund, who was the next youngest, wanted to laugh and had to keep on pretending he was blowing his nose to hide it. Yeah, you can sit crisscross applesauce and listen to the story. As soon as they had said goodnight to the professor and gone upstairs on the first night, the boys came into the girls' room and they all talked it over. "We've fallen on our feet and no mistake," said Peter. "This is going to be perfectly splendid. That old chap will let us do anything we like." "I think he's an old dear," said Susan. "Oh, come off it," said Edmund, who was tired of pretending not to be tired, which always made him bad-tempered. Don't go on talking like that. Like what? Said Susan. And anyway, it's time you were in bed. Trying to talk like mother, said Edmund. And who are you to say when I'm to go to bed? Go to bed yourself. Hadn't we all better go to bed, said Lucy. There's sure to be a row if we're heard talking here. I mean, isn't it a good thing if someone's voice is relaxing enough to put you to sleep? People always say that about Mark Sargent and Jaron, and like, oh, I just love listening to you when I'm falling asleep. And I don't know, maybe it's a good thing. I have no idea. Eric keeps saying that I'm like ASMR, and I mean, ASMR is different to every person. For me personally, my ASMR is like watching painting videos or restoration videos or whatever. So, you know, everybody has that thing that that's like, oh, it's so relaxing, so nice. I think Dottie has read this book 100 times. She doesn't even have to look at the book. I have read this book a lot of times, yeah. Ever fall asleep listening to YouTube and you wake up and it's been powering through your watch later list and the phone is roasting? Yeah. I try to not fall asleep listening to anything except music. Because like if it's a podcast or something, I want to hear what they're saying, and I don't like subliminal, hot sex messages being put in my head while I'm sleeping. So I like to be awake while I listen. No, there won't, said Peter. I tell you, this is the sort of house where no one's going to mind what we do. Anyway, they won't hear us. It's about 10 minutes walk from here down to that dining room, and any amount of stairs and passages in between. What's that noise? Said Lucy suddenly. It was a far larger house than she had ever been in before, and the thought of all those long passages and rows of doors leading into empty rooms was beginning to make her feel a little creepy. It's only a bird, silly, said Edmund. It's an owl, said Peter. This is going to be a wonderful place for birds. I shall go to bed now. I say, let's go and explore tomorrow. You might find anything in a place like this. Did you see those mountains as we came along? And the woods? There might be eagles. There might be stags. There'll be hawks. Badgers, said Lucy. Foxes, said Edmund. Rabbits, said Susan. But when the next morning came, there was a steady rain falling, so thick that when you looked out of the window, you could see neither the mountains, nor the woods, nor even the stream in the garden. Of course it would be raining, said Edmund. They had just finished their breakfast with the professor and were upstairs in the room he had set apart for them. A long, low room with 2 windows looking out in one direction and 2 in another. Do stop grumbling, Ed, said Susan. 10 to 1 it'll clear up in an hour or so, and in the meantime, we're pretty well off. There's a wireless and lots of books. Not for me, said Peter. I'm going to explore in the house. Everyone agreed to this, and that was how the adventures began. It was the sort of house that you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places. The first few doors they tried led only into spare bedrooms, as everyone had expected that they would. But soon they came to a very long room full of pictures, and there they found a suit of armor. And after that was a room all hung with green, with a harp in one corner. And then came 3 steps down and 5 steps up, and then a kind of little upstairs hall and a door that led out onto a balcony. And then a whole series of rooms that led into each other and were lined with books. Most of them very old books, and some bigger than a Bible in a church. And shortly after that, they looked into a room that was quite empty except for one big wardrobe, the sort that has a looking glass in the door. There was nothing else in the room at all except a dead blue bottle on the windowsill. There's a picture for you. Mm, yeah, I don't think I've seen a real harp in life. I mean, I've seen pictures and videos, whatnot of them, but I don't think I've ever known anyone to own a harp. Kind of a lost art instrument. Nothing here, said Peter, and they all trooped out again. All except Lucy. She stayed behind because she thought it would be worthwhile trying the door of the wardrobe, even though she felt almost sure it would be locked. To her surprise, it opened quite easily, and 2 mothballs dropped out. That sounds awful, something from nothing. Sounds like a horrible thing to wake up to. But I listened to mostly Owen Benjamin, Mark Sargent. I was listening to Jaronism on Monday Night Raw, but he doesn't do it anymore, I don't think. And then Glowbusters, Crow 777. Say the professor's last name. Ketterly? Are you sure? Yeah, pretty sure it's Ketterly. Looking into the inside, she saw several coats hanging up, mostly long furs. There was nothing Lucy liked so much as the smell and feel of fur. She immediately stepped into the wardrobe and got in among the coats and rubbed her face against them, leaving the door open, of course, because she knew that it is very foolish to shut oneself into any wardrobe. Soon she went further in and found that there was a second row of coats hanging up behind the first one. It was almost quite dark in there, and she kept her arms stretched out in front of her so as not to bump her face into the back of the wardrobe. She took a step further in, then 2 or 3 steps, always expecting to feel woodwork against the tips of her fingers, but she could not feel it. This must be a simply enormous wardrobe, thought Lucy, going still further in and pushing the soft folds of the coats aside to make room for her. Then she noticed that there was something crunching under her feet. I wonder, is that more mothballs? She thought, stooping down to feel it with her hand. But instead of feeling the hard, smooth wood of the floor of the wardrobe, she felt something soft and powdery and extremely cold. This is very queer, she said, and went on a step or 2 further. Next moment, she found that what was rubbing against her face and hands was no longer soft fur, but something hard and rough and even prickly. Why, it's just like the branches of trees, she exclaimed. And then she saw that there was a light ahead of her, not a few inches away where the back of the wardrobe ought to have been, but a long way off. Hey, Johnny Poole, no problem you're late. The party's still going. Something cold and soft was falling on her. A moment later, she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at nighttime with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air. Lucy felt a little frightened, but she felt very inquisitive and excited as well. She looked back over her shoulder, and there, between the dark tree trunks, she could still see the open doorway of the wardrobe and even catch a glimpse of the empty room from which she had set out. She had, of course, left the door open, for she knew that it is a very silly thing to shut oneself into a wardrobe. It seemed to still be daylight there. I can always get back if anything goes wrong, thought Lucy. She began to walk forward, crunch, crunch, over the snow and through the wood toward the other light. In about 10 minutes, she reached it and found it was a lamppost. As she stood looking at it, wondering why there was a lamppost in the middle of a wood and wondering what to do next, she heard a pitter-patter of feet coming toward her, and soon after that a very strange person stepped out from among the trees into the light of the lamppost. He was only a little taller than Lucy herself, and he carried over his head an umbrella, white with snow. From the waist upward, he was like a man, but his legs were shaped like a goat's. The hair on them was glossy black, and instead of feet, he had goat's hooves. He also had a tail, but Lucy did not notice this at first because it was neatly caught up over the arm that held the umbrella, so as to keep it from trailing in the snow. He had a red woolen muffler around his neck, and his skin was rather reddish, too. He had a strange but pleasant little face, with a short, pointed beard and curly hair, and out of the hair there stuck 2 horns, one on each side of his forehead. One of his hands, as I have said, held the umbrella. In the other arm, he carried several brown paper parcels. What with the parcels and the snow, it looked just as if he had been doing his Christmas shopping. He was a fawn. And when he saw Lucy, he gave such a start of surprise that he dropped all his parcels. "Goodness gracious me!" exclaimed the fawn. Chapter 2. What Lucy Found There. "Good evening," said Lucy. But the fawn was so busy picking up its parcels that at first it did not reply. When it had finished, it made her a little bow. Good evening, said the fawn. Excuse me, I don't want to be inquisitive, but should I be right in thinking that you are a daughter of Eve?" "My name's Lucy," she said, not quite understanding. "But you are, forgive me, you're what they call a girl?" asked the fawn. "Of course I'm a girl," said Lucy. "You are in fact human?" "Of course I'm human," said Lucy, still a little puzzled. To be sure, said the fawn. "How stupid of me. But I've never seen a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve before. I am delighted. That is to say," and then he stopped as if it had been going to say something it had not intended, but had remembered in time. Delighted. It went on. "Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tumnus." "I'm very pleased to meet you, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy. "And may I ask, O daughter of Eve," said Mr. Tumnus, "how have you come into Narnia?" "Narnia? What's that?" said Lucy. "This is the land of Narnia," said the fawn, "where we are now, all that lies between the lamppost and the great castle of Cair Paravel on the eastern sea. And you have come from the wild woods of the west?" I got in through the wardrobe in the spare room," said Lucy. "Thank you very much, Eric. That's very nice. Reading comes very naturally to me, and I don't know. I think that comes across when I'm reading, and I kind of am able to read a little bit ahead, while I'm reading, and so I know kind of what is coming up, so I know how to express it. I don't know. It comes very naturally to me, and so I'm glad you enjoy. "Ah," said Mr. Tumnus in a rather melancholy voice, "if only I had worked harder at geography when I was a little fawn, I should no doubt know all about those strange countries. It is too late now." "But they aren't countries at all," said Lucy, almost laughing. "It's only just back there. At least, I'm not sure. It's summer there." "Meanwhile," said Mr. Tumnus, "it is winter in Narnia, and has been for ever so long, and we shall both catch cold if we stand here talking in the snow. Daughter of Eve from the far land of Spare where eternal summer reigns around the bright city of Wardrobe, how would it be if you came and had tea with me?" "Thank you very much, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy, "but I was wondering whether I ought to be getting back." "It's only just round the corner," said the fawn, "and there'll be a roaring fire and toast and sardines and cake." "Well, it's very kind of you," said Lucy, "but I shan't be able to stay long." See, if I was good at British accents, I could do accents while the children are talking because they're in England, but I'm not good at accents, so we're not going to do that. If you will take my arm, daughter of Eve, said Mr. Tumnus, I shall be able to hold the umbrella over both of us. Now, that's the way. Off we go. And so Lucy found herself walking through the wood arm in arm with this strange creature as if they had known one another all their lives. They had not gone far before they came to a place where the ground became rough, and there were rocks all about and little hills up and little hills down. At the bottom of one small valley, Mr. Tumnus turned suddenly aside as if he were going to walk straight into an unusually large rock, but at the last moment Lucy found he was leading her into the entrance of a cave. As soon as they were inside, she found herself blinking in the light of a wood fire. Then Mr. Tumnus stooped and took a flaming piece of wood out of the fire with a neat little pair of tongs and lit a lamp. Now we shan't be long, he said, and immediately put a kettle on. Yeah, you can tell that they're English when they say shan't. Americans don't really say shan't. Well, and these books are kind of older. I don't know. Let's see when they were published. $1978 or 1950. Copyright renewed 1978. So yeah, 1950. They were, they're definitely older books, but stories that are, they survive the test of time. So that's why I read these books, because so many new books now are just about agenda-driven garbage that I can't imagine reading new stories. So bringing back the stories that people have probably never heard or may have heard when they were children or whatever, but I enjoy them quite a bit. I'm looking forward to The Lord of the Rings. That's going to be really fun. Lucy thought she had never been in a nicer place. It was a little, dry, clean cave of reddish stone with a carpet on the floor and two little chairs. One for me and one for a friend, said Mr. Tumnus, and a table and a dresser and a mantelpiece over the fire, and above that a picture of an old faun with a gray beard. In one corner there was a door, which Lucy thought must lead to Mr. Tumnus's bedroom. And on one wall was a shelf full of books. Lucy looked at these while he was setting out the tea things. They had titles like The Life and Letters of Silenus, or Nymphs and Their Ways, or Men, Monks, and Gamekeepers, A Study in Popular Legend, or Is Man a Myth? Now, daughter of Eve, said the faun. Stories that are timeless. Yes, yes, indeed. And really, it was a wonderful tea. There was a nice brown egg, lightly boiled, for each of them, and then sardines on toast, and then buttered toast, and then toast with honey, and then a sugar-topped cake. And when Lucy was tired of eating, the faun began to talk. He had wonderful tales to tell them of life in the forest. He told about the midnight dances and how the nymphs who lived in the wells and the dryads who lived in the trees came out to dance with the fauns, about long hunting parties after the milk-white stag, who could give you wishes if you caught him, about feasting and treasure-seeking with the wild red dwarfs in deep mines and caverns far beneath the forest floor, and then about summer when the woods were green and old Silenus on his fat donkey would come to visit them, and sometimes Bacchus himself. And then streams would run with wine instead of water, and the whole forest would give itself up to jollification for weeks on end. Not that it isn't always winter now, he added gloomily. Then, to cheer himself up, he took out from its case on the dresser a strange little flute that looked as if it were made of straw, and began to play. And the tune he played made Lucy want to cry and laugh and dance and go to sleep all at the same time. It must have been hours later when she shook herself and said, Oh, Mr. Tumnus, I'm so sorry to stop you. And I do love that tune, but really, I must go home. I only meant to stay for a few minutes. It's just like a little crystal, just like sparkly little crystal. I don't know. Friend gave it to me, and yeah. It's no good now, you know, said the fawn, laying down its flute and shaking its head at her very sorrowfully. No good, said Lucy, jumping up and feeling rather frightened. What do you mean? I've got to go home at once. The others will be wondering what happened to me. But a moment later she asked, Mr. Tumnus, whatever is the matter? For the fawn's brown eyes had filled with tears, and then the tears began trickling down its cheeks, and soon they were running off the end of its nose, and at last it covered its face with its hands and began to howl. It's so hot in here. I need to get a fan when I do these. Mr. Tumnus, said Lucy in great distress. Don't, what is the matter? Aren't you well? Dear Mr. Tumnus, do tell me what is wrong. But the fawn continued sobbing as if its heart would break. And even when Lucy went over and put her arms round him and lent him her handkerchief, he did not stop. I'm not gonna howl. He merely took the handkerchief and kept on using it, wringing it out with both hands whenever it got too wet to be any more use, so that presently Lucy was standing in a damp patch. Mr. Tumnus, bawled Lucy in his ear, shaking him, do stop it at once. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, a great big fawn like you. What on earth are you crying about? No, I don't really have the kind of window that you can put a AC unit in. Thank you, though. Appreciate that. I have a fan in my storage unit. I just have to go get it. So there's that. Oh, sobbed Mr. Tumnus. I'm crying because I'm such a bad fawn. I don't think you're a bad fawn at all, said Lucy. I think you're a very good fawn. You're the nicest fawn I've ever met. Oh, you wouldn't say that if you knew, replied Mr. Tumnus between his sobs. No, I'm a bad fawn. I don't suppose there was ever a worse fawn since the beginning of the world. But what have you done? Asked Lucy. My old father now, said Mr. Tumnus. That's his picture over the mantelpiece. He would never have done a thing like this. A thing like what? Said Lucy. Like what I've done, said the fawn. Taken service under the White Witch. That's what I am. I'm in the pay of the White Witch. The White Witch? Who is she? Why, it is she that has got all Narnia under her thumb. It's she that makes it always winter and never Christmas. Think of that. How awful, said Lucy. But what does she pay you for? That's the worst of it, said Mr. Tumnus with a deep groan. I'm a kidnapper for her. That's what I am. Look at me, daughter of Eve. Would you believe that I'm the sort of fawn to meet a poor innocent child in the wood, one that has never done me any harm, and pretend to be friendly with it, and invite it home to my cave, all for the sake of lulling it asleep and then handing it over to the White Witch? No, said Lucy, I'm sure you wouldn't do anything of the sort. But I have, said the fawn. Well, said Lucy rather slowly, for she wanted to be truthful and yet not be too hard on him. But I have. Well, that was pretty bad, but you're so sorry for it that I'm sure you will never do it again. Daughter of Eve, don't you understand? Said the fawn. It isn't something I have done. I'm doing it now, this very moment. "What do you mean?" cried Lucy, turning very white. "You are the child," said Tumnus. "I had orders from the White Witch that if ever I saw a son of Adam or a daughter of Eve in the wood, I was to catch them and hand them over to her. And you are the first I ever met, and I've pretended to be your friend and asked you to tea, and all the time I've been meaning to wait till you were asleep and then go and tell her." "Oh, but you won't, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy. "You won't, will you? Indeed, you really mustn't." "And if I don't," said he, beginning to cry again, "she's sure to find out. And she'll have my tail cut off, and my horns sawn off, and my beard plucked out, and she'll wave her wand over my beautiful cloven hooves and turn them into horrid solid hooves like a wretched horse's. And if she is extra and specially angry, she'll turn me into stone, and I shall be only a statue of a faun in her horrible house until the 4 thrones at Cair Paravel are filled. And goodness knows when that will happen, or whether it will ever happen at all." "I'm very sorry, Mr. Tumnus," said Lucy, "but please let me go home." "Of course I will," said the fawn. "Of course I've got to. I see that now. I hadn't known what humans were like before I met you. Of course I can't give you up to the witch. Not now that I know you, but we must be off at once. I'll see you back to the lamppost. I suppose you can find your way back there to spare and wardrobe." "I'm sure I can," said Lucy. "We must go as quietly as we can," said Mr. Tumnus. "The whole wood is full of her spies. Even some of the trees are on her side." They both got up and left the tea things on the table, and Mr. Tumnus once more put up his umbrella and gave Lucy his arm, and they went out into the snow. The journey back was not at all like the journey to the fawn's cave. They stole along as quickly as they could without speaking a word, and Mr. Tumnus kept to the darkest places. Lucy was relieved when they reached the lamppost again. "Do you know your way from here, daughter of Eve?" said Tumnus. Lucy looked very hard between the trees and could just see in the distance a patch of light that looked like daylight. "Yes," she said, "I can see the wardrobe door." "Then be off home as quick as you can," said the fawn. "And can you ever forgive me for what I meant to do?" "Why, of course I can," said Lucy, shaking him heartily by the hand. "And I do hope you won't get into dreadful trouble on my account." "Farewell, daughter of Eve," said he. "Perhaps I may keep the handkerchief?" "Rather," said Lucy, and then ran toward the far-off patch of daylight as quickly as her legs would carry her. And presently, instead of rough branches brushing past her, she felt coats, and instead of crunching snow under her feet, she felt wooden boards. And all at once she found herself jumping out of the wardrobe and into the same empty room from which the whole adventure had started. She shut the wardrobe door tightly behind her and looked around, panting for breath. It was still raining, and she could hear the voices of the others in the passage. "I'm here," she shouted. "I'm here. I've come back. I'm all right." And that is the end of chapters 1 and 2. So the first chapter and the other video that I read, that will be at the end of the playlist in The Magician's Nephew. So if you haven't heard that story, you can click on the first, it's called The Magician's Nephew. And so you can click on that playlist, just click on the first video, and then it'll play you through the entire story. And then this one will probably have to, I don't know. I know that there's a way to rearrange your playlist, so I'll have to figure that out, because this one is supposed to go at the beginning of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. So this was chapters 1 and 2. And so in that playlist, you can click that one, and it will read you through this whole story. And then next week on Wednesday, we'll be continuing with chapter 3 and 4 of book 3, which is The Horse and His Boy. So that will be on Wednesday at 8. What's the best book you've read? Man. So The Horse and His Boy, that's the third book of this series that I'm on. So in this whole series, there's 7 books in total, and my favorite of the Chronicles of Narnia is the 5th book, which is The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. That one is my favorite of this series, though I really do enjoy the first one where Aslan is singing Narnia into life. That's a wonderful tale. And then The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is wonderful. I got choked up during one of my streams because one of the chapters is very intense, and it just really hit me in my feels. In my personal time, my favorite genre of book is definitely fantasy. And I like magic, princesses, dragons, good adventure, stuff like that. So when I was younger, I was really into Harry Potter, not as much anymore now. But yeah, I used to be really into those. Right now, though, the books that I'm reading, there's probably close to 50 books in this series. It's by Piers Anthony, and they're all based in the land of Xanth, which is spelled Xanth. And so I'm like, I don't know, 15 books into that series. I've read most of them, but now I'm reading through the whole series again because there's a lot at the end that I haven't read. So I'm going through that series and reading them. And they are wonderful books, great stories. They're based in this magic land. And so there's magicians and princesses and dragons and goblins, and people have magic talents. And my son Trent, actually, I named him from that series of books, The Magician Trent. That's where I got my son's name. So yeah, definitely fantasy are my absolute favorite. Books about space, yeah, and haven't really read any books about space. Once we get through the Chronicles of Narnia, we're going to do The Hobbit and then The Lord of the Rings. So all 4 of those books. And then after that, I'll be like taking suggestions or recommendations. If it seems like a book that I would like to read, I will read it to you. Yeah. The American kids I stayed with were into Harry Potter. I was not into it, being inside and not reading. Yeah, I was super into Harry Potter when I was younger. Super into them. I'm one of them nerds that likes a book to be almost in documentary style. Yeah, I've always been into fantasy books. Yeah, definitely magic and stuff like that. My son is reading the Dragon Masters books right now. They're the first chapter books that he's been reading on his own. And they're all about kids who train dragons, whatever. So he's definitely similar to me in his book taste. My granny is super into murder mysteries or true crime stories. My mom likes those too, and they both like autobiographies or whatever of celebrities. I can't stand celebrities, so I have no interest in that. Not into politics. And yeah, then as far as truther books or whatever, subjects like that, I honestly would rather just listen listen to stuff. Like I very much like visual aids and just listening to someone else tell me the gravy of like truth type stuff. But yeah, so after we get through Chronicles of Narnia and The Lord of the Rings, then I'll be taking suggestions. Zulu1 has he's always wanted to read The Hunt for Red October, so he's requested that I read that one. We'll see. Definitely not the genre of book I'd normally read, but I'm not really opposed to it. Because yeah, I don't plan on stopping story time. People seem to enjoy it. I enjoy reading to people. It's great. What book do I have that I read the most? Well, right now I'm reading through the Xanth series. So I'm in like mid-20s or so, and I think there's almost 50 books in that series. So I'm reading those strictly for enjoyment. They're full of puns and magic and magic lands, and there's always like an unexpected love story, but they're not like romance books. They're just like, I don't know, the stories always end on a happy note. The main character is always taken care of by the end. Their quest is always fulfilled. You know, the books generally start with someone in this magic land has a problem, and so they go to the magician of information, and then he sends them on a quest to get their answer, and then by the end of the story, their quest is fulfilled, their answer is answered, and they find the unexpected love, or whatever. And their questions are always like finding their purpose, or finding definitely a lot about finding their purpose. The one that I'm reading right now is about she's a cross between a goblin and a harpy. So her mother is a goblin and her father is a harpy, and those two getting together almost started a war between the goblins and harpies, because they've been at war for centuries. And so those two falling in love nearly started a war between those two, but everything worked out in the end, and so they had Galoha. And so now I'm reading her story. She's 19, and she's a pretty little goblin girl with pretty wings, and she's going to the magician to ask, how to find her destiny or whatever. And so yeah, this is one of the books that I've read in this series. But yeah, I'm reading through them all just because they're great stories, and then the ones on the end, I haven't read those. So yeah. Yeah, Game of Thrones might be fun to read. I watched the series, and it was okay. I mean, there was some pretty good parts, but kind of intense and crazy, and it was a wild series. And I mean, the writers definitely changed a ton of stuff, and did stuff that wasn't in the books, because I mean, George R.R. Martin, he was still writing the books when the series finished. So so yeah, there's definitely going to be way different stuff in the books compared to the movies. And I mean, books are pretty much always better than movies, but yeah, I'm really excited to read The Lord of the Rings. I mean, I loved the movies. They were awesome. I never saw the Hobbit series, but I loved the Lord of the Rings movies. And yeah, I've never read those books. And so I'm looking forward to that. That's going to be fun. But so like the These chapters are like super short, and the writing is like, it's pretty big font, so it doesn't take long to get through a chapter. So story time might end up being quite a while longer, because I don't know. I mean, I'll probably try and read a full chapter of Lord of the Rings, but yeah, those will definitely be longer story times, just because that font is very small and there's a lot of details in there. So those would be good. But yeah, Vox Day has some good fantasy books that he wrote, because he was so pissed off at Game of Thrones that he wrote some fantasy books that are like those stories, but probably better. So wouldn't be opposed to reading those. But yeah, we have to get through the rest of The Horse and His Boy. And then we have Prince Caspian, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader, The Silver Chair, and The Last Battle. And those are all the books in the Chronicles of Narnia. And then we have The Hobbit and all three of the Lord of the Rings. So story time is going to be going on for quite a while. Yeah. But let's see what's going on in chat. Hello to Carrie Skates and Johnny Cool, Eric DeLeon. Kirk Wilson. Sue Finelli. Something from nothing. Oh no, I'm getting the hiccups. I saw Barbara Zena in here. I read mostly Mad Magazine. Good times. Oh, you're not distracting me. I just went off on a ramble about my books and whatnot. But I thank you all for being here. Funny that it was seems to be mostly guys in the chat, but yeah, thank you all for being here. I hope you all enjoyed. And yeah, if you want to hear all the stories, the first one is The Magician's Nephew. The second one is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. And now we're on the third one, which is The Horse and His Boy. And that one, 2 new chapters are added every week on Wednesday, 8 p.m. West Coast time. So you can come and jump in live chat, and I'll read the next 2 chapters to you. Again, if you have requests for my sign, please leave me a comment below. I only have 2 letters per letter, so be strategic with what you're going to write on the sign, but requests are always open for that. And yeah, I thank you all for being here. This has been Storytime with Dottie. Much love. See y'all later.